going to be working on bat wings this time. We're going to be doing a 3-pivot bat wing set. And the first thing we need to do is, once I get all of my bones laser cut, I create a vector file for them, and then I get the bones cut automatically for me. You can always get sheet metal, draw out your pattern on the metal, and then cut the metal yourself. But that it takes time and is a lot less precise and tends to create much harsher edges, which can rip through your fabric. It's up to you guys what you want to do, of course, but that's another option if you don't want to go this route. You can also technically make it out of wood, but if you run into anything, be aware that the wood will likely snap. But for my method, I use these laser cut bone pieces. What's really nice about the aluminum too is once you get it in there and into the sleeve, you can actually, like, I have kind of little joints along the framework that are supposed to kind of be the knuckles. You can actually bend it at the knuckles and make it look like curved and really cool. So that's kind of the advantage of that. For these ones I used 0.1 aluminum. You can, if you're making them very large, you're going to want to use a larger aluminum so that they're more sturdy. And if you are doing a smaller set, you might be able to go a little thinner, but I wouldn't. Honestly, 0.1 I think is the thinnest you're going to want to go, because you do want these to be relatively sturdy and not too wobbly. So anyway, step one, once I get these back from the laser cutter, there's all of these little kind of burn marks, and the edges are pretty smooth, but there's definitely some burring, and I'm gonna go ahead and go along each and every one of these and file away any of this slag, and just go ahead and deburr all of the edges so it's nice and smooth, so that we don't rip through our fabric in the next steps. Okay, so what I use for deburring is this little deburring tool. You can get them, I think, on Amazon for like 10 bucks. And then same, like, it comes with replacement deburring whips, but, and you probably will only need one whip per project, but it's nice that it comes with extra. And if you ever need to keep doing this or use it on other things, you can always buy replacement bits. It's really nice. So that's the tool I recommend for this step. That and a, file. Okay, so for the next bit, I hang these in my paint booth, and then what we're gonna do is go ahead and Plastidip the tips. What this does, is help keep this from piercing through the fabric once we're done. It's just kind of an additional measure. If you leave them pretty loose, maybe not as big a deal, but this is metal and fabric is fabric, so it will rip if you put like a knife to it. So, and I have already sanded and deburred everything, so that helps a lot, but this is just kind of an additional step. So I get the stuff that you actually dip, and you only need it right at the end there. Okay. Then I kind of let it drip for a second, and then I come back with just a little brush and kind of pull off any of the extra. So really, all right. well, that's staying in because I'm not gonna dip another one of these. Anyway, that's the next step. Okay, so now that this has had half a second, I'm gonna go ahead and, like, there's this extra that drips off. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that off. Go ahead and pull that off. Give it a little bit of direction. This doesn't need to look particularly good. It just needs to do its job. Come on. There we go. Okay, and then I'm gonna kind of get this around the tip and hopefully can get it pretty smooth so that it doesn't catch on anything. It's dry, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit. Yeah, and so give it just a little rounded tip so that it doesn't have all that extra business on there. You can also technically like wait for it to dry and then cut it off, but you can't like sand it or anything, so it's gonna be chunky. But yeah, so now everything's plastic dipped and rounded and looks nice, and so that way when we put it in, hopefully like this will help protect the fabric for when we put it all together. Okay, so now that we have everything dried, the plastic dips looking all good, we're gonna go ahead and make claws, or bulk out these claws that we have. And I just do that with this pink insulation foam. And I just go ahead and trace around the claw. You can also, there's a lot of different ways to do this. This has many a step, but I think that, you can do this like if you want to use regular foam, and kind of the way Kamui Cosplay does it, and she, you know, just bulks up using like layers of the puzzle mat. You can do that, and then, you know, sand that down. That's an option. I use this and then Worbla and some Bondo and what have you. But you know, to each their own. Like, you don't have to do it this way. But I like to have my claws bulked up a little bit. Something like that. But yeah, so we're gonna cut 4 of these bad boys out of this foam, and then and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so for this next step, we now have 2 pieces of foam on either side, and what I'm going to do is carve this into a nice, shiny, pretty claw. Well, and I don't want it to be this blocky mess, obviously, so we're going to just go ahead and take a razor blade and carve this out. You can get a sharpener. These go really quickly. Thank you, Evil Ted, for pointing out this. It's basically just a razor blade sharpener, and you can give it a quick 1-2 to get your razor blade nice and sharp again, rather than buying a million of these. Now, they are pretty cheap, so you can just get, especially if you're only doing this once, a pack of these and probably be fine. But if you're like me and you use them all the time, it is really nice to have that sharpener so that you can go ahead and do this. So yeah, now we're going to carve this out. so what I've done is I have made this nice and rounded. And now keep in mind that I'm now going to be sanding. I'm going to put on some gloves and a mask and all that jazz so that the dust doesn't get in my lungs and kill me. But the thing to keep in mind is we are going to sand this. We're going to make this look a little bit nicer. We're going to kind of bring this down so that we don't have this gap. But we're going to do that with sandpaper, so you don't need to get it like perfect with the razor blade. You can just get it down to the main shape that you want. Be sure that you keep this area clear. That's where you're going to have the other bars pivoting, and so like it might come up here and scratch this. So I'm going to actually go ahead and pull this just a little bit higher to clear that area. We're also going to be using spacers, so that'll help a little bit, but you really don't want, you want to make sure that like the bulk of your claw is well above this area. So go over here. So we have this piece. It's going to be here, and like just as an example, like when it lines up with that hole, it's still touching this just a little bit. So I want to kind of bring this up by another centimeter or so to make sure that all of these, no matter what, are going to be clear of my claw and not scratching everything up. But other than that, I'm just going to go ahead and sand this bad boy down to a nice smooth finish before we go and put the warble on. Okay, so the next step here is we need to cover this in Worbla. And what I'm going to do is you want to make sure that you have a little bit of extra space around the claw, because it needs to wrap around a three-dimensional space versus these, which were just covering a one-dimensional space. So we have to give it a little bit of extra space. Like so. And I'm going to cut 4 of these out and then heat them and form it over. When I do it, I want to make sure that the seam is like on this edge here, and then we're going to sand it, and any kind of divots that we get, because the heat can shrink this. So we need to get it hot to form it over, but you don't want to get it too hot. And then when you do form it over and you kind of get this seam together, sometimes right there at the seam, you might find that you have little divots. So what we're going to do is fill that in with a little bit of Bondo, just like super quick, and then sand everything down as smooth as we can get it. And then the last step we're going to do is, once we get everything as smooth as we can get it, we're going to do filler primer, like 3 or so layers of that. We're going to sand it and then wet sand it so that everything's smooth and glossy, and we're going to have some and we're going to get everything smooth and glossy, and then that's when we can go ahead and paint these bad boys, and they're going to look like nice, evil, shiny claws. Okay guys, so I put the Worbla on. I had a seam here at the top and a seam here at the bottom that I have sanded off using a Dremel. And once I did use the Dremel to get most of the coarse stuff off, I went ahead and used progressively, like I think I started with 100 grit and then 220 and then 400, and just kind of sanded it away a little more to make it a little bit smoother. If you have, you'll notice around the seams that you may get little divots in the Worbla, and if you can't sand it down all the way, you can either add little pieces, like really heat up a piece of Worbla, kind of smush it in there, and you can even flatten it once you get it pretty warm. You can like really manipulate the plastic around to fill that gap. I also will use Bondo. You can get like a big tub of it for like $5 or something, $10, I don't know, and it lasts a near eternity. And if I have any little gaps or whatever that I feel like I need to fill in, especially if they're a little bit bigger, I'll use Bondo, let that cure for like 20 minutes or so, and then go in and sand that down. And that gets a nice smooth finish, and will fill in any gaps that you have. Or any seams that you think that you can still see. The seams I had on this one were pretty good. There's like one little spot in here, but I think that the filler primer is going to take care of that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the paint booth where the camera is not allowed to go, and hit this with 3 coats of filler primer, and then I will meet you back here to sand some more. Okay, so I have this now covered in a layer of filler primer, and I'm going to go ahead and just start sanding away at this. Filler primer has a tendency to like hang on to any little thing and then bulk it up a little bit. So if you have like little fuzzies on the top, it's gonna like make those fuzzies bigger, but they come right off when you start sanding. So don't worry about it too much. If you're getting that, I get it all the time. Even when I sand down pretty good, like it almost seems to like accentuate those little bits, but the whole point of the filler primer is to kind of latch on and, you know, fill in. And so as soon as you start sanding, all that'll go away and it'll smooth right out and look fabulous, just fabulous. So at the top here, I need to pull away a little bit more because there are some things that need filling. Wow. But yeah, so now to sand for hours, really. Okay, not hours. We're gonna sand for like 10 minutes. See you on the other side. Okay, so for this next part, we're gonna go ahead and make a pattern. I don't always use one. I usually just lay the framework on the fabric and just freehand it because I'm a lunatic. But for those of you who, you know, have some common sense and would like a pattern, this is how you do it. So first, you're gonna need to put together one of your frameworks. And these patterns are exactly the same. If you do like a 12-foot wingspan, all of the measurements are going to be the same as for the feathered wings. The only thing that changes is this top bar is going to be your first bone versus being, you know, another bar. I forget which measurement or bar number that is, but it's bar 5 on the old measurements. But I'm gonna go ahead and just very quickly put this together and leave all of these flat. So I'm not gonna put spacers in them now for the making of the pattern. The flatter it is, the easier it is to draw around things, versus if they're kind of three-dimensional, it's not as easy to trace around everything. So let's see. So for bat wings, the first bars are laid out. If you go into the framework, I think it's the back brace tutorial and framework tutorial. I will have a link below. If you go to that and see, it's put together exactly the same way. The only difference is that the top bone is actually going to go on the opposite side of where we normally put that top bar. This. So normally all of these kind of stair step forward. So the forward more, like the backmost bar is the one that's next to your body, and then the next group steps forward one, and then that last bar steps forward one more time. We actually put these bones on the back of this. You can put them on the front. It doesn't technically matter. The only reason I put them on the back is because these are stacked much higher than, once you put all the spacers in, they stack much higher than the feather wings do. And because of that, you kind of end up with like it coming way far forward, and it kind of impedes you a little bit to have it that far forward. And so on the back, they can encounter the actuator, but you usually aren't going to get them that far closed anyway with the fabric, so it ends up working out. And so that's the way I like to do it. But you can, nothing I say here today is set in stone. But yeah, what you do here, is this the right one? It's not, whatever. This is going to go on, oops, I'm doing this wrong. We're going to do these, let's see, stacked in reverse order. So I like to have the smallest bone the farthest back. So again, nothing I say is set in stone. Don't even worry about it. This one. And this one. And last but not least, this side. And all of your secondary bones, not the top bar, but all the other ones, are going to stack behind. Sorry, on the bottom wrist joint. The top, that way they don't have to encounter any more of the frame. They just swing freely from the bottom of that joint. This back pivot should only have that top bar on it. So don't put your bones on this back. I know, life's tough. Okay, now I'm gonna set these aside. You do realize that you're right where I need to go. Alright. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna lay this out. One bone at a time. Where I want them. way you want them when everything's said and done. So I want this. Give it a little extra space, kind of in the middle there. Make it a little more organic. Top one doesn't need as much space, I think. Yeah. Oops, who did this bed in here? Okay. So, that looks good. So the reason we're making this pattern is for the sleeves that we're going to be sewing and putting over it. And for reference, that set back there is kind of what we're going for. So similar to making the sleeves on the for the bird wings, we're going to start just a little bit higher, a little proud of this back bar, and we're going to swoop and cut off this angle. We don't want to bring it in and trace right next to the framework. We want to give it just a teeny tiny touch of extra space. We're then going to bring it to the edge of the claw here and leaving a seam allowance of, I give it just an inch. It's not, once we get everything together, it should be pretty good, but like half an inch to an inch above this claw. And then I'm going to make, just so that I always know where this is supposed to be when I cut out the fabric, I want to leave like a little marking so that when I do the final sleeve pattern, I know where all of my bones go. And then what we would want if we were, like, once we finish, right, we want it to do this kind of curvy bit. But we're not going to do that for the pattern for the sleeve right now. That's going to happen later when we cut, we're going to cut away fabric. Because we have to glue two pieces of fabric together right in the middle here at one stage. And if you try, you're never going to be able to match that up perfectly. So what we're going to do instead is kind of bow this out so that we have a little bit of space to work with when we're doing the gluing part. And I'm going to, instead of doing a concave curve, I'm going to do a little bit of a convex curve from point to point, like this, leaving little marks where each of my bones is going. And then, for this last part, I want this to come in and kind of do this thing eventually. I want to give myself plenty of space to do that. So I'm going to bring it almost straight over, even though, again, I'm going to cut it off here. But for now, I'm going to just basically do a straight line back. And we are going to be sizing this on, just to make sure that all the tensions are correct, I'm going to be sizing this on the back brace once it's together. So I'm going to just go ahead and give myself a few extra inches here to play with for that step and cut it off there. The next thing you can do, I usually, like the first part is we kind of have this good sides together, and we're going to be putting a zipper up at the top here, and then we fold it back over and then stitch these lines. So I usually have this framework inside and then pin it specifically around these bones. I find that a little bit easier for me, or you can even like take chalk and trace the pin the fabric together, but then like trace the outlines of the bones. That way you know that you have enough space. You really don't want to pinch the bones on the inside of the fabric. You can stretch it and make it hard to fish these into the sleeve and causes a bunch of problems. So, but you also don't want them to be too big. So I find that putting these inside and then pinning it kind of make sure that I don't do that. But if you want to just use a pattern, you can. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and just on the outside of these bones by a very, very narrow margin, like not even 1/4 of an inch, maybe little proud of 1/8 of an inch. We're going to draw around these bones. Now, once you get into the pivot point, what we don't want to do is stitch all the way up into here. What that's going to do is gum up the works, and they're not going to be able to close because they're going to have fabric in between them. So we don't want that. So what we're going to do is once we get to this area, we're going to kind of create like a little hand. And I'll show you on the sleeve we have over here. We'll be sewing it later, but just for reference for part 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this off right about here with like a little swoop. And I'll come in and zoom in on this in a minute. But let's go around each of the bones. And what you, whoops, made that way too close, my bad. And what you can do is basically cut out, first cut out the main thing and then cut out these bones and lay it on top if you want, and trace it that way rather than using the other method I'll show you. But these are just options, you know? No. That's good. Get out of there. Wayward nut. Okay, so that's that. And then for this bottom part, just like with the fabric sleeves that we put, the little toppers we put on the feather wings, what we don't want to do is trace this now and have it right, like our line right next to the open framework. When it closes, it's going to need more space. Again, I'll show you on this set, but for now, basically what you need to do is make sure you dip this down. Can you silence that for me, thanks? We want to dip this down and kind of create that same sleeve pattern that we had with the fabric sleeves for the feathers, and that gives this room to collapse down and create that extra space. And then this is going to come up and then over like that. And so and so this is the basic pattern that we are going to cut out of and use for our bat wings. So just go ahead and kind of show you this. And what we're going to do is from here all the way to the end, this is going to be a zipper. Okay, and then from here, we measured out where our claw was. Okay. So we're going to put this, turn the good sides together. We're going to put a zipper up here at the top. We're going to close off this little area by the wrist We're then going to leave an opening for the claw, and then we're going to stitch along this top seam to the end of where that top bone goes before we flip it inside out. So here's the pattern that we're going to use to work with our fabric. And so we're going to, from that outside line all the way around, we're going to cut that out of our fabric. For this upper portion, we're going to put a zipper. I think I wrote all this upside down. Sorry, guys. So that's where we're going to put the zipper. We're going to have a little closed section there. We're going to have an opening for our claw, and then we're going to stitch all the way along the top there, but then leave the rest of it open. All the rest of these lines where we have the bones, we're going to flip them so the good sides are out, and the whole thing is lying flat. And then we're going to stitch along each of these bones, closing it off. And so what that looks like when you're done, this is just kind of a preview. I'll cover this in part 2 because this part's kind of involved. Sorry about that noise, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to have that zipper up top, opening for the claw, and then stitch line all the way across. We're going to have, I don't even think you can see it. We're going to have a seam along the top that's turned inside out. But then the rest of this, we're basically going to lie it flat, and then all of these have stitches that go along each of the bones and hold the bones in. Makes sense? And then same here, just like with our feather sleeves, we're going to have that nice dip so that when these close, the elbows have room to dip. Makes sense? So that's going to be covered in the next section. We're going to go over making the final sleeves. Hope to see you guys then.